Alright, to finish up this unit, what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at some election procedures and some public policy things, and some of the indexes that we can use in order to kind of look at what these countries are doing and how they're perceived throughout the world. Alright, so the first thing we're going to look at here is electoral systems. Electoral systems are the rules that decide how votes are cast. Some countries use what's known as a first-past-the-post system, in which their constituencies are divided into single-member districts where candidates compete for a single representative seat. So let's break this down a little bit. A first-past-the-post system means that it's the first person to get the required number of votes to win is the person who wins. A constituency, they are the people that are actually represented in that district. And a single-member district means that you only have one person that represents that entire district. Alright, so what we're talking about here is the person who gets the most amount of votes in order to represent their people are going to be the one person that represents that district. This system is also called a plurality system or a winner-take-all system. A plurality system means that you do not need to have a majority of the votes in order to win. You're especially going to see a plurality system in places where they have a multi-party system, because when you have three parties, it's hard for any one party to get 50% of the votes. So if we're talking about a plurality system, somebody could win with 33% of the vote. Somebody could win with 20% of the vote, depending on how many parties that you have and how those votes are split. Many countries also use what's known as a proportional representation system. These systems normally have multi-member districts, meaning there are multiple legislative seats in each district. So this is different than the single-member district, which we just talked about, in which you only have one person representing a district. In a multi-member district, you have multiple people representing those districts. Okay. The percentage of votes cast for each party determine the amount of seats that party receives in the legislature. So if we're talking about a multi-party district, and 50% of the vote goes to one party, 20% of the vote goes to another, and the remaining 30% go to the last party, that means that the number of representatives for that district, that's how that is going to be mixed up within the actual legislature. Some countries also use a mixture of the proportional representation system and the single-member district system. So what they'll do is they'll say one house will be determined based upon first past the post and that single-member concept, and then in this other house, what we'll do is we'll have a multi-member district proportional system in which we will determine that based upon. Or what we'll do is we'll say half of a house is set in that single-member first past the post system, and then the other half of the house is determined proportionally. And we'll see that as we go throughout the semester. So types of elections. So there are a few different types of elections that we'll see throughout. One is the election of public officials, and this is when you actually go out and you vote for the people who are going to be put in office. So that one's pretty straightforward. Then you have a referendum. Referendums are public votes on particular policy issues. So say they wanted to, and we see this a lot, add an extra penny sales tax in Seminole County. Most of the time that's going to be put to referendum, and they're going to allow the citizens of the county to come out and vote and determine whether or not that policy should be implemented. Then you have something known as a plebiscite. This is a direct vote by all members of an electorate on an important public question, such as a change in the Constitution. And there are going to be very few places where you're going to see that type of vote actually take place. And then there are something known as initiatives. An initiative is a vote on a policy initiated by the people. So the difference between an initiative and a referendum is a policy idea that is coming from the actual government, and then the people vote on it. An initiative is when the people come up with the idea, they get a petition signed, that policy measure is added to the ballot, and then the people vote on whether or not it should be passed or not. So that's the difference. Is a referendum it's initiated by the government, and an initiative or an initiative petition is initiated by the actual citizenry. And then we've got common policy issues. All right, so when we look at public policy, economic performance and economic policy is a major thing. And we've got to understand some of the things that go into understanding what economic policy is. Economic performance can be measured in a variety of ways. The first one is gross domestic product. And gross domestic product is when you total all goods and services produced by a country's economy in a given year within that nation's borders. So you would only take the things that exist actually within the borders of the United States all of the goods, all of the services, you total that up and you get GDP. Gross national product is pretty much the same thing. It takes the GDP numbers, but it adds all of the goods and services created by a country outside of its country's borders. So say, for example, we have a call center in India or in Mexico or something like that. If it's an American-based company, you would take those goods and services provided and you would add that to GNP. If there was an American factory in Mexico, because we have factories in Mexico called maquiladoras, which we'll talk about later, that those, the money created by those things, that would be included in GNP as well. Then you have GDP and GNP per capita. So both of these, you take either the GDP number or the GNP number and you divide it amongst the entire population of the United States. So that tells you how much each individual person has based upon those concepts. And then there's also something known as purchasing power parity. This uses GNP, but takes into consideration what people can buy using their income in the local economy. So what you would do is you would compare like goods. So I would take, a certain amount of goods from Germany and a certain amount of goods from the United States, and I would look at how much money it takes to buy those things using their currency. And then you determine if there's equality or inequality there. In the downloadable version of this PowerPoint, there's a video link that explains purchasing power parity in a little bit more detail. All right. Then we look at the concepts of social welfare. Some measures of social welfare are literacy rates, distribution of income, life expectancy, and education levels. The Gini index measures the amount of economic inequality in a society. The Gini index works on a scale of 0 to 100. 0 means that there is perfect equality, and 100 means that there is complete inequality. So if you follow the link that I've provided here in your downloadable PowerPoint, this will take you to a list of countries and what their Gini index is, and it'll allow you to see kind of the countries that we're studying and be able to look at how those compare. And we'll talk about that more as we go through the semester. Then we also have the Human Development Index. And this measures the well-being of a country's people by factoring in adult literacy, life expectancy, and educational enrollment, as well as GDP. And once again, I've provided you a link there so that you can look at the HDI numbers of different countries throughout the world. Then there's the Environmental Performance Index. This ranks how well countries perform on high-priority environmental issues in two broad policy areas: protection of human health from environmental harm and protection of ecosystems. Once again, there's a link that you can follow to be able to look at different countries throughout the world and see what their EPI is. Then we also have the Corruptions Perceptions Index, which scores countries on how corrupt their public sectors are seen to be. So how well the government actually communicates with the people and what they're actually doing within their country. Once again, there's a link for you to check that out. Then we also have to look at this concept of public policy. We've got civil liberties, political rights, and political freedom. Political rights refer to promotion of equality. So when we look at the different types of political rights that exist, if we were to look at that, say like in the United States, the concept of civil rights, the ability for everybody, regardless of race, religion, creed, color, any sort of distinguishing factor like that, to be able to make sure that they have the equality of opportunity. So that's what we like to see when we look at the concept of political rights. Then we have the idea of civil liberties. Civil liberties refer to the promotion of freedom. So freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to petition, freedom of the press, any of those different types of things. Those are all things that we look at when we look at that idea of freedom. So in order to measure that idea of freedom, we have something known as the Freedom House rankings. And the Freedom House studies, they rank a country on a scale of 1 to 7. A score of 1 means that you are living in an extremely free society, and a score of 7 shows that you are in a society that is extremely not free. And once again, there's a link there for you to be able to explore the different countries throughout the world and look at their Freedom House rankings. We also look at the idea of environmental concepts. So what type of environmental policies have been put in place in order to be able to help a country be successful?